Hi, I'm Emily Rovillo, and I created a zine called After the Bacchanal. This piece explores mental illness and the effects that social isolation can have on the mind, especially if you already struggle with mental illness. The past year or so has, of course, been extremely difficult, and while this is not a piece focused on COVID or focused on quarantine by any means, those are certainly causes of this exacerbated state of mental illness that I've found in myself and honestly in almost everyone that I know. I think that that is something that needs to be talked about, but I also think that it's something that we are largely reluctant to talk about, and I understand why. It's a very vulnerable and uncomfortable conversation to have, and I actually had to be talked into doing this project and focusing on that subject matter because it is a really difficult state of mind to open up about and to share with other people. But I also know that I am not the only person who has been affected this way, and I wanted to create something that others who might be feeling the same way as me or experiencing similar types of things could look at and feel maybe a little bit less alone in that. I think right now there is a lot of focus on moving forward, and that's great. Moving forward is great, but I also believe that there is a certain amount of healing that needs to happen. And that healing cannot be done without us being willing to talk about it and to talk about what we are all collectively feeling and going through right now. So the kind of bread and butter of this zine is the photography, and one of my main goals with the photography was to play with perspective. There are a lot of close-ups that don't necessarily present the full story of what you are seeing, and there's also a lot of long exposure shots in which color and lighting and motion are all working together to obscure the original subject of the photo and, the way I see it, create like this new subject. I also tried to work a lot with unexpected subjects, so that included a lot of like exploring for trashed and abandoned items, and the intent with all of this was to create something that was a little bit disorienting and unexpected and just a little bit like detached from reality and falling into this sense of chaos instead. And then, of course, the editing comes into play. So I worked in Adobe Illustrator and InDesign for a little bit, but most of the work for this project was done in Photoshop, and I utilized a really wide range of the tools that are available in that program. One of those is the Liquify tool and the Warp tool as well. I use those kind of tangentially to shape these images and shape text into exactly like the shape that I wanted it to have. And I also did a lot with layers and like layering the same image over itself a bunch of times and then messing with the opacity and color settings in order to create this sort of glitched out, again, very disorienting, just kind of chaotic effect. I also, as much as this zine is very digital in nature, the illustrative aspects, for the most part, actually all started on paper. I do a lot of drawing and sketching on paper, and then I will scan it into Photoshop, and from there, enhance it and build on it digitally. So I used the Greek play The Bacchae by Euripides as a vehicle to communicate this story of falling into the dark parts of ourselves. This is a story about disconnection and madness and frenzy, and I use that aspect of the story to understand and illustrate the state that my own mind and emotions were in. I'm also really fascinated by the human storytelling tradition, and by the fact that we have essentially been telling the same stories for thousands and thousands of years, right? Like the same themes and storylines and everything, they all stay relevant to us, and we feel the same way, and we keep these stories alive. And I think that's very cool, and I view my work here as a part of that tradition, as adding to these retellings of the same old stories. And so through engaging with my zine, I invite everyone else to join in that tradition as well.